بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to episode 23 of the series Authentic Statements of the Companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In this episode we'll take the statement of Aisha r.a, in which she said she used to enter her house where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was buried. As we all know, he was buried in her house where he passed away, and she would take off her hijab. It's just her house, there's no one else in there except the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ buried in his grave. And she would say, it's my father and my husband, it's my husband and my father. There's no one else in there except her husband, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was buried there. And then Abu Bakr, her father, may Allah be pleased with him, who was also buried in there next to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because when he passed away, he was buried next to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So she used to say, I used to go into my house, it's her house, there's no one else in there, there's the Prophet ﷺ, her husband, Abu Bakr anhu, her father, buried in there, just their two graves. And so she would take off her hijab. But then when Umar anhu was buried next to them, as we all know, when Umar passed away, he was buried next to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Abu Bakr. And so when Umar was buried next to them, she said, by Allah, I would not enter, she's talking about entering her own home, except with her completely covered, with her clothes completely covered, with her full hijab, out of حياء from Umar. SubhanAllah, we see Aisha r.a setting a great example for the believers of having حياء. She was so modest, and the term حياء doesn't translate very well into modesty, but for a lack of a better word, she was so modest, had so much sense of حياء, that she wouldn't take her own hijab off in her own house with no one else around, just because Umar was buried in there. He wasn't alive. No one would have said that this was something wrong to do, yet just to be out of extreme حياء that she had, she would keep her hijab on in her own house, even though it's her own house, there's no other non-mahram men there, but just because Umar was buried in there next to her father and her husband, yet she kept her hijab completely on, she stayed completely covered whenever she entered her own house. Barakallahu fikum, jazakumullahu khaira, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.